met her before. But
this meeting is being recorded.
oh, we don't want to start recording yet.
Yep, it's already started. So we are currently live, just a heads up for everyone that is on the panel. The button was accidentally pressed. I will go ahead and start the screen, the opening screen.
Maybe we all mute until 12.
Yep, that's perfect.
Welcome everybody on this beautiful spring day. I can see that people are still joining us, so we'll give everybody a few more minutes to connect. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ursula Wojciechowska. I'm the Executive Director of CONECT. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to our annual Trade with Canada Forum. We have a esteemed group of speakers with us today, but before we get started, let me thank our sponsors who are also CONECT partners, namely KPMG and Yusen Logistics. We'd also like to thank the Consulate General of Canada, Boston, the New England Canada Business Council, and Customs and Border Protection Agency for their support. Please mark your calendars for two CONECT events coming up. First is our Port Cargo Tour, which is on June the 8th, and our Spring Trade and Transportation Conference, which is on June the 22nd, which is taking place this year in Natick, Mass. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat feature at the bottom of your screens, and we will try and get to as many of those as we possibly can. This webinar is being recorded. And I would now like to pass over to Mark Jacques, Senior Political and Economic Affairs Officer at Canadian Consulate, who will introduce our guest speaker. Mark, over to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Jacques. Rodger Cuzner was first elected to the House of Commons in November 2000 as the Member of Parliament for Bar-d'Or, Cape Breton. He was re-elected in 5 subsequent elections before his recent retirement in October 2019. During his 19 years in Ottawa, Rodger served in several roles, including Parliamentary Secretary to former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, Chief Opposition Whip, and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Human Resources and Skills Development. In his early years in Parliament, Rodger focused on matters surrounding both veteran affairs and fisheries and oceans. More recently, much of his attention was directed towards workforce development and labor issues. As an elected official representing the beautiful and iconic Northern Nova Scotia, Cape Breton Island, he worked with community and industry to build and mature the tourism sector. Major investments in infrastructure contributed to this growth, notably 2 of the top-rated golf courses in the world, Cabot Links and Cabot Cliffs. Prior to this appointment, Rodger worked in the private sector as senior advisor at Rubicon Strategies in Ottawa. A graduate of St. Francis Xavier University, Rodger grew up in Glace Bay, Nova Scotia. He is married to Lynn Nay Hopkins, and they currently live along the Mirror River in Cape Breton. They have 3 sons, Mitch, Scott, and Brad. Consul General Cuzner, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Mark. I appreciate that. And good afternoon, all that have taken the time to join in the conversation today. I want to start by thanking Ursula and her colleagues at CONECT for putting this together and for extending the invitation. If anybody is having trouble starting their day, they might want to have a quick call in the morning with Ursula. She is got that positivity and enthusiasm that's just a ray of sunshine in the morning, and I always enjoy the way she addresses whatever the issue might be for the day. So Ursula, thanks again for the invitation to be here. Let me start with this. The only way we can move forward towards further developing our economic ties and continuing to strengthen our cross-border relationships is by working with each other more effectively. This pandemic has shown us one thing. It's that New Englanders and Eastern Canadians are better off and our economies are stronger when we work together. During the time I have with you today, I'd like to focus on 2 things. First, helping you better understand the Canada-New England trade and how our companies can take advantage of the world's largest bilateral trade relationship. And the second, the new US MCA and how the Consul General of Canada can help. And I understand my colleague from the Mexican Consulate, Consul General Humberto, is on the call today, and I wasn't aware that he was joining us, but as I make reference to USMCA, I'd welcome him if he'd like to join in and make some comments as well. I'll begin by explaining what we do at the consulate and how we can help. The first point is very clear and very simple. We have trade commissioners. They work in a number of important commercial sectors: marine technology, food and beverage, clean tech, defense, medical devices, and consumer goods, just to name a few. If you are a company looking to partner with a Canadian company to purchase goods and services, we can help you. If you're a company looking to expand into Canada in order to be on the ground in Canada, our investment team can help you. If you're a company looking to sell goods and services to Canada, while we don't handle that work directly, we have outstanding relationships with colleagues at the U.S. commercial service offices throughout New England, so we can make sure that you have the proper contacts to follow through most effectively. Bottom line regarding our work with New England companies is that if you are looking to trade with Canada, your first call should be to the Consulate, and we will make sure you are in good hands. Another way that we can help companies and other organizations throughout New England is through our targeted advocacy outreach. Let me explain some of those issues that we've advocated for, what they mean, and how they impact Canada-New England trade relationships. On a larger economic scale, one whose impact has been and continues to be impacted by border measures and legislative action in the US, the supply chain and the integrated nature of our economies is the most important subject we work on. The Canada-US trade relationship at large, the New England Eastern Canada one more specifically, are built on the fact that we not only sell to each other, but we make things together. Our trade is primarily in intermediate goods that go to a final North American product that we buy from each other and sell across the world. Canada is the sole and most important supplier to the US for more products than any other country, even China. These products, important to both American manufacturing and to everyday life, include agricultural and natural resources products and transportation equipment. In Canada, we are very concerned with the domestic content requirements, or Buy America requirements, that are in the physical infrastructure bill signed by President Biden in November. It will expand Buy America requirements to all infrastructure-related projects and to construction materials, including metals, glass, optic glass, lumber, drywall, as well as plastic and polymer-based products. On top of this expansion, the Buy America requirements are already apply to iron, steel, and manufactured products will be expanded and strengthened, with new products covered and tougher thresholds for what goods count as produced in the US. Let me be clear, Canada shares the US goal of stimulating job creation and supporting workers. However, applying Buy America against Canadian inputs will have an opposite effect. It will negatively impact US jobs and US companies that rely on cross-border supply chains. As I said, we don't just sell to each other, we make things together. The majority of US imports from Canada, roughly 60%, are intermediate goods that feed American manufacturing. They go into final US made products and fuel millions of US jobs. Think autos and agriculture. And Canada buys more from the US than any other country by a wide margin. Moreover, the US sells more goods to Canada than the United Kingdom, Japan, and China combined. No one country can produce everything it needs, so it is critical to source from secure, reliable, and market-based partners. For this, Canada is the US natural and best trading partner. Just if I could share a quote from Brian Deese, the director for the National Economic Council, when he was addressing the New York Economic Club recently about the new economy. His quote was, "It is not possible for the US or any country, for that matter, to domestically produce 100% of the goods we need. We need to have strong partnerships and relationships in order to keep supply chains strong." Our relationship is not just one of geographic convenience, it's essential for the stability and security of both our nations. And our cross-border supply chains underpin our security and defense partnership. We share the US goal of addressing supply chain vulnerabilities and have similar concerns about the loss of manufacturing jobs due to unfair competition from non-market players. There is more that we can do together to hold these players to account and prevent the flood of subsidized goods into North America. By applying Buy America to Canada does not address this global challenge. Countries like ours, with similar economic structures, robust labor and environmental regimes, workers represented by the same unions in many cases, and deep defense and security partnerships, we need to work together to reinforce our supply chain security and to hold to account those who seek to undermine our national and economic security. Building and construction materials is an area where our industries and workforces are completely integrated and regional in nature. This allows products to move back and forth across the border to maximize manufacturing logistics and address regional demand. For many construction materials, the US has a trade surplus with Canada in things like drywall, glass, plastic, polymer-based products. Building and construction materials are estimated to account for 39% of carbon emissions globally. Hence, investing in public infrastructure using low carbon materials and construction processes will be crucial for us to reach our collective climate goals. As a world leader in low carbon products, Canada helps the US reach its climate goals. But collaboration in sourcing and production also requires reciprocity in access. The US has an overall procurement trade surplus with Canada. This means our government buys more from US suppliers than the US buys from Canadian suppliers. We purchase about $1 billion worth of goods from the US. The US in turn purchases about $600 million worth of construction materials from the Canada purchases the billion, and the US purchase about 600 million. US suppliers have greatly benefited from open procurement with Canada, but these expanded US domestic content requirements in government procurement, if applied against Canadian inputs, will put this at risk. We recognize that the US desire to use government procurement to support American workers and jobs. However, the economic recovery efforts that limit the use of inputs from Canada would negatively affect our binational supply chains, distort investment, add layers of bureaucracy, and threaten jobs, all while driving up the cost of important public infrastructure. Companies in the northern border states would be among the most negatively impacted by such measures, as their supply chains rely more heavily on partnerships with Canada. This in turn risks making them less competitive compared to their counterparts in other regions of the US. Recently, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials stated, and I quote, "Expanding requirements on Buy American provisions will lead to significant project delays and cost inflation, and exacerbate already difficult market conditions." The importance of reciprocity was highlighted in Canada's 2021 budget and mandate letters, with the commitment to pursue reciprocal procurement policy. This means Canada will seek to only procure goods and services from countries that grant Canadian businesses a similar level of access. It would be unfortunate and unnecessary if the Canadian government were to adopt a reciprocity approach where US inputs, goods, and suppliers are no longer eligible for Canadian infrastructure projects. Instead, we hope to work together on a binational solution for the Buy American requirements included in the physical infrastructure bill by building on our unparalleled security, defense, and economic partnership. To be frank, much of what I've just said is, while very important, quite general, and can be perceived as high level and more linked to the overall Canada-US relationship. However, these do impact New England specifically. In April, the New Hampshire legislature passed a bill relative to state procurement policies intended to promote the use of American materials. The Made in America restrictions will apply to public projects exceeding $1 million for reconstruction, alteration, repair, and improvement of maintenance of public buildings and public works. As a result, Canadian manufacturers will no longer be eligible to compete for such projects in New Hampshire. Supporters of the bill readily acknowledge that the move will likely drive up material and construction costs for public projects, and the New Hampshire Department of Administrative Services said the cost impacts of using American manufactured iron, steel, and manufactured goods is indeterminable due to wide-ranging price fluctuations for these goods, supply chain shortages, and US imposed tariffs. While Buy America type policies seem to be wise, and I mean, what politician would ever speak out against Buy America? Obviously, you want to be on the side of American workers, and we understand that. But while they seem like wise measures in order to support local jobs, the end result is to limit the availability of labor and materials and affect costs at the time when inflation has already driven up prices for construction. In the end, it is important to insist on the fact that Canada is a reliable, predictable, and secure trading partner for the US. Let's work together to ensure that our mutual prosperity and national security continue to be supported by our resilient supply chains. This will strengthen our ability to swiftly build back our economies and ensure the livelihoods of our citizens. Let me comment on the USMCA. Ironically enough, as we look to find ways to work together to promote more inclusive trade policies, we have quite recently just implemented a very successful trade agreement between our three nations. The USMCA includes updates in key areas, including rules of origin for automotive, manufacturing, agriculture, labor, intellectual property rights, culture, and dispute settlement. It also ensures continued duty-free access for NAFTA goods, and it maintains original outcomes on trade in services and labor mobility. The agreement reinforces North American supply chains and enables Canada, the US, and Mexico to compete as a regional bloc against international competitors. In some areas, notably in the auto sector, we have strengthened rules for rules of origin and provided added certainty for continued market access should 232 measures be taken, which will help incentivize North American production and sourcing and create well-paying middle-class jobs in our countries. The agreement includes robust chapters on labor and the environment, both of which are subject to dispute settlement. In these chapters and throughout the USMCA, updates and agreements will help create incentives for higher wages and better working conditions in all three countries. 9 new chapters have been incorporated into the USMCA, covering modern-day trade challenges, including digital trade, regulatory cooperation, and North American competitiveness. These represent much-needed updates to the original agreement. The economies and standards of living in all three nations have expanded dramatically since the implementation of the original NAFTA, and the modernization of NAFTA marks an important milestone in Canadian economic relationship with the US and Mexico. The final outcome preserves key elements of NAFTA, modernizes provisions to address the 21st century trade challenges, reduces red tape at the border, and provides enhanced predictability and stability for workers and businesses across the integrated North American market. Another final subject, most notably as we look to move forward to a greener economy and attempt to shift from fossil fuels, is critical minerals. The global economy is increasingly dependent on critical minerals for clean technologies like electric vehicles and advanced batteries. Defense, security, and tech manufacturing are pivotal. These minerals are essential to support the transformation to a global net zero emissions economy. Efforts to build resilient global critical mineral supply chains will require international cooperation. That is why Canada is working collaboratively with partners such as the US, the European Union, Japan, and Australia. Canada is a secure and reliable supplier for critical minerals, including sought-after metals like nickel and copper, and significant deposits of lithium and graphite. Canada has long been a trusted defense and security partner of the US, as well as a secure and responsible source of minerals deemed critical by the US. We are developing a critical mineral strategy, including $3.8 billion in new funds to support its implementation that will support the growth of critical minerals in Canada and supply manufacturing in EV batteries, clean technologies, and defense and advanced manufacturing. Canada is more than just a source of raw materials. We have a significant capacity and expertise, as well as cost and sustainability advantages across the supply chain, including in processing and advanced manufacturing. Canada and the US share a mutual interest in improving critical mineral security and ensuring future competitiveness in both countries. Our mining sector is an important source of investment and jobs in the US, with some 300 Canadian mining companies and a combined $40 billion in mining assets here in the US. In 2020, Canada and the US finalized the Canada-US Action Plan on Critical Minerals Collaboration, advancing our mutual interest in securing supply chains in critical minerals of benefit to communication technology, aerospace, defense, and clean tech. The action plan will guide industry engagement, securing critical minerals, and improving information sharing on mineral resources. Since the joint action plan was finalized, we've made substantial progress in identifying needs and addressing gaps. We like developing new battery metal and rare earth processing capacity in North America. In 2021, President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau also agreed to work together to build the necessary supply chains to make Canada and the US global leaders in all aspects of battery development and production by strengthening the Canada-US Critical Minerals Action Plan. Batteries for zero emissions vehicles and renewable energy storage. While understanding that CONECT is not a group focused on tourism and retail sector, I'd be remiss to address our trade relationship without discussing the impact of COVID. It's abundantly clear that all parts of New England have been impacted by COVID, and each New England state has suffered economic ramifications from the border closure. But it is also clear that Northern New England has suffered particularly hard. The economies of the states of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine are heavily driven by the tourism sector. And with the border having been closed for so long, this industry has lost a large part of their clientele, and it will take some time before it is back to full strength. The retail industry in many border towns is likewise one which traditionally receives strong revenue from Canadian visitors, and 2020 to 2022 has lagged behind recent years. The lack of Canadian visitors in Northern New England has had a negative impact, and we all look forward to a strong winter tourism boom and the border being reopened. Looking forward to a strong summer tourism boom for sure. Likewise, we continue to hope that conditions continue to stabilize in a way that will allow our summer tourist season to flourish in this upcoming summer. With 2 lost summers for places like Old Orchard Beach, Bar Harbor, Hampton Beach, Burlington, and Borderlands, it's imperative that we continue working together to stem the spread of COVID so that our citizens can continue exploring all that we have to offer. In closing, I want to stress that there do remain challenges regarding commercial and personal travel to Canada during this pandemic, and crossing the border is not quite as simple as it was pre-2020. Since November 8th, 2021, our countries have been reopened to fully vaccinated travelers for non-essential reasons at both points of entry by land and air. This milestone was an important step that will help restore mobility between our two countries without compromising the health and safety of our citizens. We do recognize that both Canada and the United States will continue to assess the evolving situation and make the adjustments as required. Similar to work that we must do together to combat COVID, we must work together to strengthen our economies and further North American economic development. The USMCA can be a great tool to help us all compete globally and more regionally. We have an incredible opportunity to work across New England and Eastern Canada to stimulate growth, create jobs, and rebuild our economies, which have been impacted by COVID, inflation, and other global forces. Once again, thank you for participating in today's presentation. And might I call is my Consul General Umberto on hand, if he may want to join. Mark?
Yeah, is the Consul General of Mexico able to participate on microphone or perhaps by video chat? By asking questions, Ursula, I'm not sure. I'll give it a moment pause. If not, maybe I'll just introduce Peter, who will be leading the Q&A, and perhaps the Consul General can take part via sending questions that way. So I think maybe right now. So Peter Howe has been involved with journalism and broadcasting for over 30 years, serving as a strategic communications advisor and content creator for businesses, associations, nonprofits, and public sector clients with messaging and storytelling. Peter has reported and edited for the Boston Globe for 22 years, and at New England Cable News delivered on-air stories, commentary, and interviews as business editor and CEO Corner host for 8 years. For the last 5 years, he has been a senior strategic, senior advisor for Dentralene, and he is also the new president of the New England Canada Business Council. Peter, I invite you to share the question and answers.
Great. Mark, merci beaucoup, très bien dit. I feel very flattered and honored. Thank you. But no, my most important hat here today is as president of the New England Canada Business Council, and we're a partner and very good friends with CONECT. And we like to say one example of the complementarity between CONECT and NECBC is we are a group of people who greatly believe in all the benefits of strong bilateral trade relationships between New England and Canada. And I feel like you are the folks who actually do it on the ground and regulate it and keep it safe and secure. So we are very grateful and honored to be able to participate in this discussion today, and are always looking for what can we do to continue to keep this strong, important, so mutually valuable relationship going and recovering from some of the disruptions that we've seen from COVID. So I would encourage folks, if you have questions for Consul General Cuzner, to pop them either into the chat or the Q&A. And I will also, in the meantime, introduce Joy Nott, who will be the next speaker. She is currently the Trade and Customs partner in the Trade and Customs practice at KPMG Canada, and a former president of Importers and Exporters of Canada, and a leading expert in this field. So Joy, as we're waiting for some questions to come in, why don't I turn it over to you to introduce yourself and say a little more.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's my pleasure to be here today and to be with this esteemed panel. You know, I'm just going to echo what you just said while I'm chatting to the audience. Please feel free to put any questions that you may have for Consul General Cuzner into the chat, and we'll make sure that we circle around back to those questions. You know, before we get started and I introduce my fellow panelists, I just have to say, you know, just leveraging off what Consul General Cuzner said, the Trade Commissioner Service is one of the best kept secrets in Canada. And, you know, for someone, I've seen the work that they do. I've seen the work that they've done over a period of decades, and it's truly fantastic. And it's not something that is necessarily well known about. If I said, walked up to a Canadian on the street, or walked up to a business person on the street and said the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service, do you know what that is? Unfortunately, like probably 8 or 9 times out of 10, they would say no. But if you're not familiar with that service, I would strongly encourage you to get in touch and to take a look. If you're interested in doing business with Canada, the name of this particular session today is Open for Business with Canada, and I can't stress enough the valuable tool that the Trade Commissioner Services. So that was an unsolicited plug, Consul General Cuzner, but heartfelt. I genuinely mean it, because I've seen the fantastic work they do. So while we're waiting for questions, there is a question that's come in here, Peter, so I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. This is from Eric Uverard. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your last name. Question about the extent to which, for, I presume, US companies, is it easier to hire a citizen from Canada than from other countries? And if so, how?
I think Canada is not unlike many other places in the world right now where there seems to be a universal skill shortage. But we've taken steps, and I know here in the New England area, you can't go anywhere without seeing looking for help or help wanting to hire. But in Canada, we've recognized that, and in order to increase that pool of available labor, certain infrastructures have to be put in place. And there are two things that I think we've done and done well with access to trying to unlock the potential of the workforce, with trying to encourage women to get back into the workforce. The federal government has gone into bilateral agreements with each of the provinces and territories to support universal childcare and affordable childcare. And so with that being in place, we're seeing more women come back into the workforce, and that's been a huge shot in the arm. The other thing is the hiring of necessary talent and exceptional talent. Our citizenship and immigration, Canadian immigration has an express entry program. And if a company needs a specific talent set, we know that these talented people, you look at the IT sector, for example, we know these people can go anywhere in the world and work. And we think the express entry, which can turn around applications in 2 weeks, is to the advantage of those wanting to do business in Canada. The program itself had been put on hiatus during COVID, but it's scheduled to start back up again in July. And so we think that's, and we know that, investment follows talent. And so being able to bring in some of the best talent from around the world will be to the benefit of Canadian companies.
Yeah. No, I certainly would observe, Rodger, as an American, I greatly admire what an extraordinary job Canada does of being open to and welcoming of the greatest talent of the world. We can learn a lot from you and apply it down the road. We got a great question in from Susan Morris asking and I throw it open to the group to talk about research and development partnerships and activities between and among universities in Canada and the US, and some of the things that you see there, perhaps opportunities to expand and grow those ties, and in particular Memorial, Dalhousie, McGill, Queens, Waterloo, others. Would turn it over, to Rodger, Joy, any of you who have thoughts about university R&D and our opportunity between the two countries there.
Joy, would you like to start, or I could, ladies before gentlemen, by all means.
Sure. So I'll just speak quickly, and then I'll defer to you, Consul General Cuzner. So, I mean, has the Consul General pointed out in his remarks, Canada and the US have a long history of making things together, and a lot of that history stems back to research and development for the new creation of new technologies, new products. We have a long history, going back decades, doing that together as two countries. We are like-minded countries that share the same values, and we've been shoulder to shoulder in various efforts, including, past world wars and all sorts of things, going to market and standing shoulder to shoulder. So in our universities right now, I'm not particularly familiar with what's happening with the universities personally, but I certainly know that free trade agreements, like we call it CUSMA in Canada, in the United States, it's USMCA, TMEC in Mexico. That agreement lends itself to that kind of cooperation between universities. That's the whole purpose of that free trade agreement, to encourage companies, including universities, research and development, think tanks and whatnot, to work together as a bloc, as the Consul General said, because, you know, we live in very interesting times, pandemic aside. We live in very interesting times. The world is fragmenting, in my personal opinion, into blocks, business blocks, Europe versus Asia, Asia versus the United States, or sorry, North America versus South America versus Africa. I mean, we're breaking up into blocks. Whether or not that's what we should do, that's a discussion for another day and for minds much greater than mine. But I think that the opportunity, the governments of all three countries have put the framework in place to encourage that kind of cooperation. And I'll defer to Consul General Cuzner for any additional comment relative to the university space. You may know something there that I don't.
Yeah, well, even to step back from that, the relationship between the two countries, and Cuzner's Flemish, but I'm a MacDonald and a Leonard on the other side. So, and coming from Cape Breton, there's a great deal of Scottish blood. And the relationship is a lot like the old Scottish couple, Margaret and Rory. And Margaret said to Rory, Rory, you never tell me that you love me anymore. And Rory said, well, Margaret said, you remember her wedding day? Oh, yes, I remember her wedding day. Said, remember I told you I loved you on our wedding day? She said, yes, you told me you loved me on the wedding day. He said, well, if anything changed, you'll be the first to know. And so a relationship, you know, there is so much between the two countries. It's family, it's friends, it's security, it's business, it's, you know, we align on so much. A lot of the times we take for granted. And universities is a great example. We're on a call this afternoon, Concordia University in Quebec, in Montreal, and Harvard. They've gotten together and are working on a special presentation on misinformation and the concern around, you know, disinformation and misinformation. We're going up in June to Halifax, where Dalhousie is hosting an H2O conference. And Rhode Island, the university in Rhode Island, is one of the co-sponsors. We were down there just back 2 months ago with a similar with Ocean Tech and Blue Tech technology. So those institutions are constantly working together. They see, you know, the borders as not being any kind of an impediment. The sharing of knowledge for common good is something that they understand and appreciate. Mark and I we just came back from Dartmouth, where we saw a scholar in on the Arctic from Canada. So that exchange is ongoing, and it's important to both sides of the border.
That's great. And I just would add, Bridgewater State University, Andy Holman heads their Canadian Studies program. He's a member of the NECBC board. They, you know, that's a very strong connection between New England and Canada. They are also University of Vermont Business School, you know, has a terrific program. Just a couple more examples of that. I think we have time for one more question before I turn it over to Joy to lead the panel discussion. It's a question regarding finding in-person training on Canadian export controls. Somebody looking who keeps getting referred to the Global Affairs website, but is hoping to get in-person training on Canadian export controls. Consul General Cuzner, or maybe Mark Jacques, does that ring bells for you?
I can actually lean in here.
Oh, great.
Okay. So it's funny, I laughed when you started reading that question simply because in my experience, this is a very, very common question. Canadian export controls have taken on a new and more important stance. They've always been important, but I think they've become more of the sort of the limelight in the past 10 years. And honestly, there is sort of a shortage in the marketplace of places to go and get that training. You know, this is not a pitch in any way, but it's actually something that I do. I have more than 15 years of Canadian export control experience. I've been a consultant most of my career, and it's something that I personally do. And I've held a lot of those Canadian export control in-person training sessions for Germans, UK, Americans, Mexicans, Brazilians, in my career. So I'd be more than happy to answer that question offline, but you're absolutely right. I wish I could tell you that there was like tons of places to go. Unfortunately, there isn't. To be fair, and other than myself, some Canadian law firms also, they don't do training per se, but they'll answer specific questions. But training and the technical processes and stuff and how to actually make it work Monday to Friday, that's something that KPMG does. So I'd be happy to talk about that offline. And sorry, over to Mark or Consul General for any additional comment.
Great.
You put it perfectly.
All right, before I turn the gavel over to Joy, let me just note that Alberto Fierro Garza, Mexico's Consul General in Boston, has popped in a note saying he's grateful for Consul General Cuzner's mention of my presence in this seminar. And he notes Mexico believes too in the importance of USMCA for a strong North American market with integrated supply chains. So, Senor Consul General, thank you very much for joining us today. Joy, let me let you lead the next phase of our event today, the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Peter. And now I have the distinct honor of being able to introduce our panelists here today. We have two U.S. Customs Border Protection officers with us today. The first one being Michel Pariseau, who is the Assistant Area Port Director in St. Albans, Vermont. Officer Pariseau is currently serving as the Assistant Area Port Director for Trade in the Area Port of St. Albans, Vermont since October of 2020. He oversees trade and commercial operations for all ports of entry in Vermont and Pittsburgh, New Hampshire. This includes 3 full commercial entry ports and numerous permit ports through the port area. Prior to arriving in St. Albans, Officer Pariseau served as the Port Director at Montreal Pre-Clearance from July of 2017 through to October of 2020, and prior to that as Chief Officer from 2013 to 2017. Officer Pariseau was also active with US CBP pre-clearance expansion as a technical expert on baggage handling and baggage release systems, working in multiple expansion locations such as Oslo, Norway, Narita, Japan, and Quebec City, Quebec. Officer Pariseau also performed various temporary duty assignments throughout his career to include Port Director of Halifax, Nova Scotia Pre-Clearance Facility and the Service Port Director overseeing all operations in Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Southern Massachusetts. Officer Pariseau has also performed multiple long-term duty assignments at the US CBP headquarters, working on the Secure Border Initiative for the Tactical Operations Division, that amongst many other projects that he's worked on. Officer Pariseau began his career in 1988 with the US Customs and Border Service in Beecher Falls, Vermont, and he's held various positions throughout. Next up, we have Officer Timothy Lacasse, Service Director for Jackman, Maine. Officer Lacasse is currently serving as the Service Port Director for Jackman, Maine, and his area with the area responsibility in the Boston Field Office. In this role, he oversees 2 24/7 Class A ports of entry in Western Maine, 4 remote border stations in northern Maine woods. He works at the direction of the Maine area port located in South Portland, Maine, to ensure proper oversight and compliance in all programs related to anti-terrorism, immigration, customs, agriculture, and trade at all 6 Jackman area of responsibility locations. He's currently acting as the Assistant Director Field Operations Trade for the Boston Field Office. He's responsible for operations at 1 major airport, 4 small commercial airports, 17 seaports, and 39 land border ports of entry along the Canadian border. Previously, Officer Lacasse served as the Assistant Port Director for Trade in the Port of Calais, Maine. And while in that role, he served a 3-month temporary work assignment for a mission support at headquarters in Washington, D.C. Officer Lacasse is currently in his 26th year of federal service and began his career with the former U.S. Customs Service in 1995 as a student inspector trainee in port. Throughout his career, he progressed through various ranks in the field, holding numerous senior leadership positions, including Senior Customs Inspector, Supervisor Custody Inspector, and so on. Next up, we have my fellow partner at KPMG, Kenneth Jordan. Ken is, with over a decade of experience, Ken is my fellow partner at KPMG. We form Trade and Customs, which is part of the indirect tax practice at KPMG. Ken practices in advising clients on customs and cross-border transactions, including advisory, recovering duties, audit assistance, and overall compliance assistance. And with the complexity of supply chains increasing and the transformation of customs administrations around the world, Ken helps companies navigate importing and exporting while mitigating costs. He has assisted companies in multiple industries, including automotive, food and beverage, consumer goods, technology, life sciences, and industrial products. And prior to joining KPMG, Ken established a consulting practice servicing middle market companies in Canada. Ken personally is known for his extensive knowledge of the Canada Border Services Agency, otherwise known as CBSA, operations, with years of experience supporting audits, including the defense of multi-million-dollar audit assessments. He's managed cases before the Canadian International Trade Tribunal, otherwise known as the CITP, and he has a wide-ranging experience in other areas of trade and customs. Moving on to, not last but least, Harry Mann. Harry Mann is a director of sales at Yusen Logistics with a global freight forwarding, specializing in international freight forwarding, warehousing, and domestic and cross-border transportation. Harry has over 10 years of consolidated experience in domestic and cross-border transportation, operations planning, IFF pricing, and sales. In 2016, Harry was tasked with starting an over-road department at Yusen Logistics Canada, to add domestics and cross-border transportation services to its portfolio. With the development of the new department, Harry immediately began to introduce the service of the newly formed department to existing and new customers located in different geographic locations. With his operational expertise and passion for sales, Harry has achieved a tremendous amount of success in growing Yusen's transportation department to become one of the largest and most profitable departments in Logistics Canada. So thank you, all of you, to my fellow panelists, and thank you for being here today. It's certainly my honor. I'd like to start off, if I may, with the two U.S. Customs officers, and Michel, I'm sort of going to point to you, Officer Pariseau, I should say. We certainly live in interesting times, and there's been lots of things that have been happening, but what sort of issues have you seen with respect to cargo clearance issues in the Vermont area? Oh, we can't hear you for some reason. Okay, so how about we sort of let you figure out why we're not being able to pick up your actual audio, and maybe what I'll do is I'll flip to Officer Lacasse. So Officer Lacasse, you know, basically the same sort of question. What sort of issues have you seen with cargo clearances in the Maine area in your particular case, with all the interesting times that we live in? Are there any?
Maine area, can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, perfect. Good. Awesome. Good. Actually, it's been cargo, you know, amongst COVID and everything, probably everybody's sick of talking about COVID. It really hasn't traded. We haven't seen much of an impact. I shouldn't say there's an impact, but as far as the flow of the one thing really positive out of that continued. And we're talking, you know, air, land border, rail, been really positive with that. Always worked well with our Canadian counterparts and with CBSA and with the other government agencies in Canada. So we worked well. So that really hasn't changed. I haven't seen a change on that one. What I'm really proud to say, and I think you're going to see some progress for both our U.S. and Canadian stakeholders, is the upgrades and replacements of some of our facilities. And speaking on the main side of the house, like for instance, we have Madawaska's being built right as we speak right now. That is a permit port, but it will be a larger permit port, not far from Van Buren, where that is a newer commercial center. I think that one was built in like 2010. I say newer, but one of our newer ones. So Madawaska is being built. We're looking at that being ready end of 2023, calendar year 2024. So we're excited about that one. That's going to be great for both our passenger and commercial traffic. This one's huge. This is a game changer. And again, I want to emphasize this has not been approved yet, but hopefully we are going to go to Congress to get this approved. Coben Gore is designated as one of the main locations to be replaced with a new port of entry. That's our most western port, our busiest permit port. And the thought process is they're so busy, we're permit ports. Let's just make it a commercial center with scanning capabilities, increase our staff. So that's west of Jackman, east of Derby line. So you're going to have another commercial center there. That's huge. So now they don't, cross-border activity. You're not just looking at Derby line or the Beecher Falls and the Jackmans. You got another port of entry where people can cross. And we do get a lot of traffic, Maritimes that want to transit from Cove and Gore back and forth to, the western side of Canada and to the eastern side of Canada. So I think that's definitely a game changer. So it is CBP's, it is our plan to make that a commercial center. I like to think we're going to be successful. So that's a game changer right there. And then on our eastern side of the state, towards the Holton, the Aroostook County area, we have Fort Fairfield and Limestone, both, I'm going to call them the refreshes, modernizing a little bit. So we talk about modernizations. That's something I think we're really proud of, is on the CBP side of the house, we're able to get the funding to replace these locations and do some updates. And I'll actually turn it over to APD Pariseau as far as if his mic's working okay, as far as the Vermont side of the house, as far as the facilities and upgrades over there.
So we'll try this again, Officer Pariseau. Hopefully we can hear you this time.
Can you hear me this time?
We can. There you go. So I'll sort of start off asking you the same sort of question that was just being spoken to. What sort of enhancements is CBP looking at in your case in the Vermont area?
Right. I mean, we're looking at the same type of enhancements or upgrades, renovations that Mr. Lacasse spoke about. We're looking at a full replacement of the Highgate Springs Commercial Center, or the whole facility. That's going to be huge because that's one of the direct lines, travel lines coming down from Montreal. We're years away, obviously, because these things take time, but that's going to tie into the road improvements on the Canadian side. And my understanding of upgrades or new facility for the for CBSA side as well. We think that's going to be it's going to be a big project, but it's going to bring a lot of enhancements to that location, which is between that and Derby line year to year. Those are the two busiest commercial centers and ports of entry in the state of Vermont. Also, many of the smaller ports along the border are going to get some renovation and updates to include enhancements to technology. And that includes a couple other what are smaller commercial ports in Richford and Norton, Vermont, and then upgrades to BB Plains and Alberg Springs as well. And so that will help facilitate not just the trade, but also the legitimate travel. So we're very excited about all of those projects that will be forthcoming in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll say. I know that sounds like a long time, but once they're done, it'll be really good. And along with the innovation, technology will be, for our purposes, will be port hardening, so we can work things like people who are trying to, what we call port runners, trying to go through without reporting. So we're very excited about that. I know originally you had a different question than that, but that's all I have in regards to the facilities.
So if you want to address the first question, it was just sort of like, what have you seen with the release of cargo clearances? Any difficulties, especially given in the age of COVID? Were there any trends that you saw that impeded the release of cargo? At first everything slowed down. We know everything slowed down, but it came back up pretty quickly. I think both countries did a really good job in understanding that there needed to continue to be that facilitation of trade. The cargo still had to move through. So I did reach out to my teams at each of the major commercial centers, and they said that, except for right at the beginning, it's gone pretty smoothly. A couple things that they have seen is, we're seeing we're still seeing quite a few new transportation companies and importers that we probably didn't see before. And we don't know if that's, we think it might be part of supply chain, the trucking industry as a whole. But for our smaller ports of entry, it was mentioned earlier, permit ports, which, we clear limited commercial traffic at those ports, but we still end up clearing quite a bit of commercial goods.
And it's the importers and the transportation companies not understanding, the permit port process, and that slows up the processing of the goods at those locations. From an agricultural standpoint, we do have our agricultural specialists, and that's a very important process for us as well, for agricultural safety and consumer product safety. And one of the things we've seen a lot of lately, enough so it's been mentioned to me, is the wood packing materials that we see, so it's coming out of, a third country through Canada.
Yeah.
We're seeing, early on when that first was put into effect, it took some time for the companies to understand what was required. We've seen a lot in the last year. And again, I'm not sure if that goes back to maybe some supply chain issues where normally would be, be coming out of Canada, but now they're coming out of a third country. So we've seen a lot of wood packing materials where the requirement to have the material stamped to show that it's been treated not being there. Again, that slows down the process, and we've also had to return some shipments to Canada based on it's not like they could offload the packing materials and we could continue with the facilitation of the goods. So those are we haven't had a lot of issues, but those are two main issues that were brought up to me from my teams.
Yeah, and that's interesting because obviously I'm not a Canadian customs officer, but I can certainly speak as a Canadian. For those wood products coming into our country as well that are not properly stamped, not to prove that they're not properly treated, and the potential spread of pests and insects and whatever else, we share that concern. I mean, Mother Nature has no idea where the Canada-US border is, and invasive species that are invasive species into the United States are invasive species for the most part into Canada as well. We share the same landmass, so that's interesting to note. You talked a little bit about having the borders enhance their actual technology and stuff. So I'm going to divert back to Officer Lacasse to say, I know that US CBP has something called the Automated Commercial Environment, ACE, otherwise known as ACE. And are there any sort of enhancements that are coming relative to sort of the heartbeat of your technology on ACE?
It's not. That's a great question. Yes, as we speak, we're working on phase 2 in the land border. There's various phases. I think it was 4 phases, and well, not just land border, but in the vessel environment. That's ongoing. In June, we're actually training some of our trainers to train our officers on some of the new upgrades that are out there. And I won't bore you with all the details here, and I'll send the information to the team at CONECT. Some of the links I think are important links for ACE, some of the support services that we have, some of the training, some of the just resources that you have here. I mean, ACE portal issues, ACE functionality, ACE portal password issues, cargo maintenance service, deployment updates. That's huge. And then cargo processing automation issues. So I think those are 2 huge. Also, what I'll add there, and maybe some of the stakeholders already have this information, but I think 2 CBP employees, they're a broker client representation to both CBP and the trade. I think those Stephanie Grover and Frank Rodriguez. I don't know if a lot of people know them. I think that's good information as far as getting their contact information out to the trade, the kind of the liaison between CBP and the trade. And if there's ACE issues, they can also help steer everybody in the right direction. So we use them, we rely on them. So maybe more even important after this webinar, I'll get those links, that information to the team to maybe get that out. So yeah, ACEs, it's ongoing. They keep making updates, both for external and internal users.
And
I just want to circle. I did forget one thing. I want to circle back in terms of just a kudos on this one. Jackman Rail has a new inspection facility. Actually, the ribbon cutting ceremony is coming up very soon, where we're going to open for operation. Matter of fact, I'm sitting in the office right now. This brand new facility that we worked with one of the railroad stakeholders. So that's a huge game changer. Again, our ability to, our number one mission is advance the national security, and right with it is processing or getting our legitimate freight and travel through here as fast as we can and securely. So I think a facility like this, in addition to the land border port of entries that we're making these updates, will allow us Canada to move their freight even quicker, in and out. So, and this facility actually services inspections for both our Vanceboro, which is our eastern side of the state location where the rail crosses as far in, as well as Jackman. So I didn't want to forget that one.
Thank you. And I think we can all agree, you know, infrastructure, a lot of, I'm speaking from experience here, but a lot of the infrastructure that's in place at a lot of these border crossings that you guys have been mentioning was put in place decades ago, and as time marches on, the volume of cargo that's going back and forth between the two countries, that both countries just need improved infrastructure because we have business that we need to do, and we need the infrastructure in place to be able to do that business. And Officer Pariseau, I see you sort of nodding your head.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, just we're very excited about all this new infrastructure, either renovations, upgrades, and the new facilities. I mean, we're working out of many locations that were built in 1933, 1937. You know, a lot of them were built in that time frame, and the footprint just doesn't allow, the current footprint just doesn't allow for the innovation, the technology that we would like to see and have at other locations. So when this came out within the last couple of months about the locations, we were very excited. As some of you know, a lot of it goes to the southern border. So in this go around, we have a lot of it come to the northern border, and we have a lot of it come to New England. So there's, if Tim can correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's 10 locations in Vermont, in Maine, that will be seeing improvements with this infrastructure support that we're getting. So we're very excited about that.
Yes, APD Pariseau, you're spot on. I even say that, like, a lot of the Vermont ports, and seeing both Maine and Vermont, it's interesting. I call them the cookie cutters, the 1930s, mid 30s. You know, your Ferry Point, Calais, Maine, your Coburn Gorge, you know, compared to some of the similar, you know, going to Vermont, I'm like, wow, this is a flashback. It looks like the same port of entry for the most part. You know, the custom side of the house and the immigration side of the house. So it's a game changer to get these places changed. I mean, I look back at my years in Calais. We had Ferry Point where all the commercial trucks came through. You know, one lane along with the passenger vehicles. And we get all these fish trucks at once. You know, they would be 50 trucks lined up, and traffic is just backlogging. The facility just couldn't handle it. And now they have a newer facility in Calais, Maine. So we are making improvements.
Yeah, from my own personal experience, my family is personally from New Brunswick. And as a little kid, I remember going to St. Stephen to buy Ganong chocolates, and then crossing the little tiny narrow bridge to get into Calais, Maine, because the ice cream shop was in Calais, Maine. So I'm kind of old, so we're going back, you know, 45 years ago but that little tiny bridge between St. Stephen and Calais, Maine, and those little customs offices that, you know, I fully hear what you're saying. Now, I wanted just to sort of address something, because today we're saying that Canada, the title of today's session is Canada's Open for Business. I heard, I think it was Officer Pariseau, I think you said earlier, that, you know, the hardening of the border, meaning putting more infrastructure in place. I just want to give you the opportunity to speak about trade facilitation and then trade security, because I think we all agree trade security, it's a necessary. Canada feels that way. You guys feel that way. That's a necessary. Hardening of the border is not anti-trade facilitation, correct? I mean, this is being done to help facilitate and speed things up.
That's correct. And part of that is having the technology, the tools. So if we can get technology, non-intrusive inspection technology to help us scan, look at, then we're not necessarily spending hours, what we would call de-vanning a truck to look through. So that is part of the port hardening. The technology aspect, like Tim mentioned earlier, in the ACE environment, so doing upgrades to ACE, you know, we have a lot of training we do with our staff. So all of this will help with the facilitation. We fully understand that, you know, as Tim mentioned, you know, advancing national security, and that's from a trade perspective as well, is our #1 priority. But we believe we can do that in concert with trade facilitation. So having everything put together, we can do what we need to do in regards to security, but also get that merchandise, get the goods down the road. And some other things that I think the trade community can help, the transportation community can help, would be things like getting their drivers through the trusted traveler programs. So, Nexus Fast, things of that nature. So I know Tim mentioned, going to forward some links through CONECT, but in regards to ACEs, if you go on cbp.gov, the website, the open side website, there's really a lot of good information on ACE in there. There's a support resources, there's a fact section, and it also talks about the port modernization that we're going through for ACE. So there's information out there that can help also the trade community to look forward as we are modernizing as well.
So I thank both of you for your comments, and I think we all agree. The Canadians and the Americans agree. Security first. On both of our sides, that's everything from security against pests and insects that are invasive to North America, right on through to illegal activity that's happening at the border. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm hearing that if you're a legitimate trader and you're running a legitimate above board business and you fully understand what the requirements are, the government, and I'm going to pivot to Ken here in a second, that US CBP, the mindset, despite the fact that you hear words like hardening the border, it's a positive thing. It's putting processes in place to facilitate trade, right? Is that a fair statement?
I agree. Yes, that is a very fair statement.
Okay, so now that we've sort of touched on what's happening on the US side of the border, Ken, I'm going to pivot to you to talk to us a little bit about Canada. Doesn't have something called ACE, but there is something coming down the pipe called CARM, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about what that is, because it's kind of the Canadian version of ACE. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, for sure. No, thanks, Joy. Yeah, so CARM is coming down the pipeline. I'm going to be positive about our government's implementation here with the trade counselor on the line. I'm not going to be negative, but it did get pushed back. So it originally was supposed to come out this month, actually, in about 15 days or so. It would have been going live, but right now it's been pushed back to the first quarter of 2023. CARM is going to be taking a lot of paper-based processes for customs, a lot of paper-based applications to customs as well, written correspondence, and moving it all online. It's going to be a portal that you log into. You'll be able to access your trade data. You'll receive communications from officers through there. You'll assign rights for your business to contractors such as or suppliers such as brokers, logistics providers. So it'll be a complete kind of modernization, moving online of the customs processes, and should hopefully clean up a lot of these outdated processes that Canada's been using for quite a while.
Thank you. And just as a reminder to those in the audience, at any time, if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll be monitoring the chat, and we'll address your questions as they pop up. So just as a reminder there. But I mean, so Ken, today, I mean, you and I work together. We've both been in the world of Canada Customs and acting as an advisor to Canada Customs for both of us now for decades. The Canadian system has traditionally been a patchwork of sort of part paper, part electronic, and then kind of those two things would be mashed together in certain processes. I mean, I think we both know, and based on what you just said, CARM is going to be basically an electronic platform. Yep. So what would you say are probably like the biggest changes that companies who are listening in our audience today, US-based companies who may want to act as Canadian importer of record in a post-CARM world, how different is their shipments and their day going to look?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for any American companies that are acting as a non-resident importer into Canada, there'll be some substantial changes. Some of them you may be used to if you're importing into the US already, and some of them are going to be pretty drastic changes. One of those big changes is the requirement to get a bond to act as importer of record. So anybody that imports into the US right now, you'd have a bond to be able to act as importer of record. In Canada, historically, we've always relied on our brokers to provide that bond. So brokers would release goods into Canada under their account security. They would then request payment from you at a later date and time and facilitate that payment to the government. And that's really where that other big major change is coming under CARM. The government wants to get away from a taxation system where there's a third party who's receiving payments and then paying the government. It's a system that doesn't exist for any other type of tax in Canada, really only customs duties and GST payable at the border has a third-party intermediary handing cash. So in this new CARM process, there is an expectation that companies will begin paying the Canada Border Services Agency directly. There is a system already in place called GST Direct that some companies use. It allows you to pay your GST directly. There's also a duty and GST Direct that you can take advantage of. One of the biggest difficulties with that, however, right now, is you need to be able to pay the CBSA in very specific ways. They don't take wire transfers. The checks have to be sent to a very specific office in Ottawa in order to be processed. There is a way to pay through your bank, but as of right now, unfortunately, it's limited to Canadian banks. So there's a requirement to get a Canadian bank account set up to pay those duties and taxes. So there are some difficult features behind that for non-resident importers. There's definitely difficulty in grasping how you're going to be able to pay the government going forward. Now that delay is actually probably a little bit beneficial. With that said, there's no outright restriction on brokers paying the government on your behalf. It is a service the brokers will be able to continue to offer. So it might be one of those consideration points when you're selecting a broker going forward. If you don't have the ability to pay customs, hiring a broker who is willing to pay customs on your behalf on a go-forward basis would be one of those considerations.
Yeah, that's a good point. And given the fact that once CARM is implemented sometime early in 2023, since it's not something brokers will be traditionally doing anymore, that tradition is changing. I think we can expect that there'll be an additional cost that will come with that from a brokerage perspective. But I just want to pivot now quickly to Harry, because Harry, you're literally where the rubber hits the road. You are their transportation companies. So CARM and everything going electronic is changing things. And since you are the right at the base of the transaction, you carry the goods across the border. What do you see as being the advantages and disadvantages of CARM from your perspective?
Well, thank you, Joy, and thank you, Ken, for a detailed explanation of the advantages of CARM. With advantages, obviously, we see certain disadvantages as well, which may further delay the border crossing and then may delay the trucks trying to cross the border. For disadvantages, the main ones that I see with CARM will, every importer will have to ensure that they are properly set up on the portal and they have their own bonds in place. Any issues with importers not being set up properly could leave the importers struggling to find ways to pay for the duties and taxes at the time of entry. And this can obviously delay the trucks. Now that we live in a new world where majority of the trucking companies are on e-logs, if the trucks are being delayed at the border, we're eating from drivers' available hours of service, and this may delay the border crossing overall. And traditionally, like Ken said before, that customs broker would pay for the duties and taxes on the behalf of importers of the record. Now that the responsibility will shift from customs brokers to importers, importers will have to make sure that they have greater connectivity with the banks to facilitate the payments of the duties. In being in the transportation industry, we always see customers who want to go for larger payment terms from 30 days to 60 days. And this usually have something to do with their connectivity with the banks. And this could also lead or could also add some challenges where companies or importers may struggle with making those payment arrangements in a timely manner, which may delay the border crossing for many transportation companies. Also, importers will have to make sure that they have proper accounting processes in place to make sure that the duties and taxes are being paid on time. Again, if they're not paid on time, then the transportation operation overall will suffer due to these delays. And Ken already touched briefly on the new non-resident importer of the records, who will have to register for CARM as well, just as a regular Canadian importer, and they'll have the same responsibility as the other importers to ensure that Canadian duties and taxes are being paid on time. So this means that they'll have to have a Canadian, or they'll have to be registered with the Canadian bank to ensure that they have a Canadian account already set up to pay CBSA directly.
So, I mean, I know that a lot of what we're talking about here is, it sounds kind of painful, and it sounds like for those who are maybe not familiar with CARM yet, Ken, I'm going to pivot back to you. What can companies do today to prepare for CARM? Because okay, it was supposed to be happening in 17 days. It's not happening in 17 days. It's going to happen sometime in the first quarter of 2023. But there's got to be stuff people can do today to help prepare, so the day shipments start to fall under CARM, it's not chaos.
Yeah, no, for sure. Anybody who's currently acting as an importer of record into Canada should have received a package actually last May, about a year ago now, that would have contained instructions on setting up that portal. I believe that my coordinates are going to be made available at the end of this call. If not, feel free to find me on LinkedIn, send me a message. I can send you that information package. Happy to connect with you on that. That gives you information on how to set up your portal. You do have full rights to set up your portal in advance, so you can be setting up portals right now, even though the system isn't live. That can be used for various things like applying for rulings. Again, we're joining the 21st century here. Rulings will be done online, not via paper submitted to an office in London somewhere. So that is coming along right now. The other thing I'd really recommend in order to prepare is start thinking about that bond. We've been working with companies already who are applying for their bond, who are on month 3 or month 4 of their bond application. It is a process, quite a long process. I know that some smaller businesses have had a bit of an easier time. There's some thresholds where if you're importing under a certain amount, you can make that application, but getting on top of that bond process to get ready for that announcement when it comes down on exact implementation date in Q1 of 2023, that preparation is key.
And Ken, I obviously know the answer to this question in advance, but is a bond the only kind of security that Canada Customs will accept?
They'll take cash as well. So feel free to pony up the cash and leave it with customs and get it back when you stop importing into Canada and request a refund of that bond. But those are the two ways. And
if I can just add a footnote to that, if you get a bond, how the bond is calculated is they take a look at your 12 previous months, July 1st to June 30th every year. They look at your annual, what's your history look like? What was the biggest month that you owed money, the highest amount? And that's the amount that your bond needs to be. If you need to bond, you only need to bond at 50% of that amount. If you don't have a bond in place day of, because let's say your bond is still working through the application process because you don't have your bond yet, you can post cash, but then you have to post 100% of the cash.
And I guess just to layer onto that as well, it's not just customs duties. In Canada, GST is owing at the border, so 5% GST on all payments. It's recoverable as an input tax credit, provided you're doing business in Canada and are registered. But that bond calculation is on duty plus the GST amount.
That's right. That's right. So, I think the takeaway from this is that, we heard Officer Lacasse and Officer Pariseau talking about technology. We've just heard Ken and Harry talk about technology. I think one of the main takeaways from today for those of you listening in the audience is that if you currently have a lot of paper-based processes of connecting with your transportation companies and connecting with your customs brokers and that sort of thing, that's fine if you fax them documentation. Be aware that they then need to take that documentation and they need to turn it into data elements, because we're in the 21st century. It's no longer forms, it's data elements that are used. Last question for you, Ken, and then I'm going to pivot back to Harry. Given the fact that we're talking about that both we've heard today, USCBP is enhancing ACE. ACE has been around now for a decade, maybe a little bit more, and they're enhancing it. And Canada Customs is now, rolling out CARM very shortly. We're in the age of big data. What are Canada Customs audits looking like these days, and what impact do you think big data is going to have on audits?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So Canada Customs twice a year releases what's called a verification priority list. They don't call them audits. It's a verification. They're verifying everything's correct. And they have those priorities they release. There's around classification, valuation, origin. Fresh cut flowers origin has been on there since the late 90s. They audit it all the time just to make sure everything's correct. But they have that verification list that they go through. Canada Customs really does like right now looking at the related party and valuation are kind of those two hot topics from an audit perspective. Canada does not use the first sale system. As a matter of fact, Canadian Customs typically looks to the last sale when they're trying to value goods into Canada. So it's a complete shift in terms of how valuation works in Canada. And so we do see a lot of audits around that for American-based non-resident importers, as well as companies with American-based parent companies. The other thing I think in terms of modernization of audits, what we're looking at is Canada Customs through CARM is starting to talk about new methods of communication. There was a new thing coming down the pipeline called a TAN, Targeted Advice Notice, I believe is what the summary of what that stands for. These will be kind of similar to a CF-28. It'll be a quick question fired at companies, asking a question on a specific import. Why is it classified that way? What's the origin that way? They're using a data analytics system in the background that's being designed by one of the other big four companies, big four accounting companies, to process all that data that's coming in and try and identify exceptions on a timely basis, and using these new TANs and new verifications to really try and tighten up on Canada's version of informed compliance, really.
Yeah, and I just want to draw attention to words that you said at the very beginning. I very recently was talking to an American-based company that acts as a non-resident importer of record into Canada, and I asked them just through conversation, are you under audit at the moment by Canada Customs? And they said, oh, no. But we did receive a letter where they told us that it's a verification. That's an important distinction. I mean, so I'm here today to say we don't technically use the word audit in Canada. They will tell you, you'll get a letter, and if you see the word verification, that means audit. That literally, it's not just, don't take it lightly, and that it's just that is an audit. Pay attention to the questions you're being asked. And then I know this goes without saying, and I'll defer to the two customs officers to lean in. If a customs the way the law is structured in Canada, and I'm sure it's the same in the United States, if a customs officer asks you for any documentation related to a particular shipment, it could be anything. It could be proof of payment. It could be foreign vendor invoices. It could be bills of material. It could be anything. In Canada, you're obliged to turn it over. So if you see the word verification, that means audit. And whatever you're being asked for, take it seriously and, give it the due respect that those requests deserve. So I just want to pivot quickly back to Harry, because I don't want to lose sight of the fact that, border operations, we've talked here today about, facilitating trade, all this technology that both Canada and the United States are investing in to help facilitate trade while ensuring security and ensuring that, legitimate traders are processed quickly and painlessly, and those who are not legitimate, who are trying to do something that they shouldn't be doing, get stopped, right? I mean, I think we can all agree, for those of us who are playing by the rules, we want to be in and out quickly. Those who are not playing by the rules, we want people like Officer Lacasse and Officer Pariseau and their counterparts in Canada to catch those guys, because it drags us down as legitimate business people. But when you see things, Harry, like, illegal border blockades that suddenly create chaos, it springs up out of nowhere, and suddenly you've got trucks that are diverting from one port to the next because the port's closed. Talk to me a little bit about what happened during those times and what kind of chaos that caused.
Thank you, Joy. Chaos is the perfect word to describe it, because we had, for the first couple of days, it did feel that everything came to a halt. Nothing was moving. We had many trucking companies that had their drivers and trucks stuck on both sides of the border. Drivers had nowhere to go, and it just felt like nothing's moving. And there were also some, we all heard about driver shortage all over in North America. And now we have driver shortage, and plus we have some drivers participating in these illegal blockades. It was a major hit that we saw here in Canada and US, obviously, that was impacting the trade. Driver shortage and these illegal blockades made many drivers nervous about even going on a trip. So the result of that was we saw higher trucking rates because the companies that were willing to go take a different routes, we saw much higher trucking rates. As an example, on some of the lanes where we used to pay maybe $1,500, we saw rates quadruple, and many importers who could wait on transporting their goods because of higher trucking rates held off. They just wanted for the market to be normal again before they could start shipping, the ones who could wait, obviously. And it did take a negative impact on the overall trade between US and Canada. And in addition to that, CBSA relaxed their rules a little bit. When the drivers try to cross at one port, CBSA would direct them to a different port because of the blockades. And it just meant more work for the drivers, calling their customs brokers, telling them to change the port of the entry in the paperwork so that it's an easier crossing. And in certain cases, the customs broker would have to go back into the system and file for RMD corrections. So it did cause a chaos, additional work for truckers, for customs brokers. It delayed the transportation of goods, and I'm glad that it's behind us. And hopefully, if such situation was to repeat itself in the future, that there are better means and procedures in place to fight these situations without causing too much chaos for the normal public and transportation community.
Yeah, and I'm sure it caused a lot of extra work as well for Canada Customs, because the reason why it's so important when a truck is destined for one port and it gets diverted to another port for any reason, why that causes so much work is because customs officers, we just finished saying that we live in a world now of big data. Customs authorities want to know when something's approaching the border, because if they have intelligence on that shipment for illegal activity or for any reason they want to inspect it, they need to know where is it coming to so that they can divert the resources to that port to meet that truck, to inspect or whatever else that they want to do. So if it gets diverted to another port at the last moment, not only is it data elements that need to be changed, it's potentially resources that need to be sent from one port to the next port. It's a little bit hectic. So I am conscious of time, and what I'm going to do, we have a few minutes left, is I'm going to turn it back to Peter. I don't know that we have any questions in the Q&A, but again, we welcome questions. If you've got any questions, we only have a few minutes left, but please put them in the chat, and the panel here would be happy to answer them. So Peter, I'll sort of turn it back to you for.
Great. I do have a question, I think not for the uniformed officers, but just, wearing my NECBC hat. Any other topics that have not yet come up today where groups like NECBC could be helpful on promoting and growing the trade relationship? Any other sort of concerns or places, as we're talking to our members of Congress or US senators, things you'd encourage us to know about and advocate for?
Well, I have one, and I'll defer to Consul General Cuzner or anybody else on the line. But one of them, I think, where Canada and the United States, again, are working hand in glove and in partnership, because again, our values and how we work together and how we conduct business and our sense of right and wrong are very much alike in Canada and the States, is with respect to forced labor and supply chains. Modern slavery, forced labor, depending on, it's the G in ESG. We talk about environmental and social governance. That's everything from greening of supply chains. Well, the G in ESG is governance and ensuring that child labor, slave labor, forced labor, prison labor, et cetera, are not in supply chains. I think that that's something that's going to become a hot topic, where companies are going to be expected to prove they don't have that in their supply chain. You can't just assume. You're going to be expected to know. So that would be something I would put on the table.
Very well said. Thank you. No, I do see that we are right at time. So I think, why don't we wrap it up here? And Joy, thank you so much, and great deep gratitude to all our panelists. Thank you very much, and to our border protection officials, thank you for serving and protecting our country. We appreciate the work you and your people do all the time. And so I know on behalf of CONECT, I want to express how grateful we are to our sponsors and everybody for joining us today. And we've got some on the screen some upcoming events for you to know about. Cargo Facilities Tour and Spring Trade and Transportation Conference. So with that, I think I will sign off, let everybody get on to the rest of their day. And thank you very much, everybody, for your participation, your great questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to join.